This is Uncensored Conservatism, episode number 174, looking at Project 2025. Since it's so controversial, So, chapter 27 is about the financial regulatory agencies, and the section about the Securities Exchange Commission, or the SEC, was written by David Burton of the Heritage Foundation, shown here. The primary purpose of the SEC is to deter and punish fraud in the capital markets like stock exchanges so that investors can make informed choices. The laws establishing the SEC were passed in 1933 and 1934 in response to the Great Depression, and their first chairman was Joseph Kennedy, a friend of Franklin Roosevelt. In the decades since, the laws have been amended into a complex series of incoherent regulations and rules that go far beyond its original purpose. For example, the current SEC has proposed a climate change rule. If enacted, it would quadruple the cost of businesses and have an impact on existing companies. It would also decrease the number of companies in which to invest over time, which certainly does not benefit any stockholder. Project 2025 notes that the SEC passes regulations that fail to distinguish sometimes between private, public, and intermediate firms. There should be obvious disclosure requirements for investors to make these informed decisions, while specifying secondary markets for securities of these firms. Burton argues that the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority and the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board should both be abolished since they are beyond reform and are costly and ineffective. Schedule A securities offerings should be looked at to eliminate so-called blue sky regulations. These are state-level regulations for securities that should be preempted, and they simply add to the cost to businesses and more regulations. The SEC also defines an accredited investor, which serves to deter investment in privately held companies. At the very least, the rules should be openly transparent for accreditation, and at the other end, maybe they should just be abolished. So this section of Chapter 27 is very detailed on a myriad of rules and regulations investors and companies, public and private, must abide by, and I'm not going to get into a lot of technical detail on them. Instead, the gist of the section is a concentrated review of costly and ineffective regulations that deter smaller companies from entering the securities market. Regulation of the stock market and securities market is designed to inform you, the investor, or your proxy, to make decisions. You want to invest in green energy, do your research, but don't make the company do it for you, with the government pointing the gun to their heads. Those decisions should be based on the financial stability of the security only, not extraneous stuff like climate change or DEI policies. Mandating composition of a boardroom should never be a consideration of the SEC. Now, the second half of the chapter deals with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, and was written by Robert Bowes of the Heritage Foundation. The CFPB was authorized in 2010 under the Dodd-Frank Act. Since its inception, it's been criticized as an independent agency with no congressional oversight and described as a shakedown mechanism. In 2023, it had a budget of $653 million, and since 2010 has assessed $1.25 billion in civil penalties. Dodd-Frank and the CFPB were passed in knee-jerk fashion over the 2008 financial crisis that created the Great Recession. The CFPB establishes rules to protect consumers in the financial markets, including banks and credit companies, and collects fines imposed by private companies that are then deposited in the civil penalty fund. The fund is then used for two purposes: to compensate victims and underwrite financial literacy and consumer education programs. So you can see where the problems are heading here. How the funds are spent is solely at the discretion of the director of the CFPB. Now, the CFPB is funded annually by the Federal Reserve, not Congress, and represents 12% of all the operating expenses of the Federal Reserve. Because Congress was bypassed as a source of appropriations, the director can be removed by the president to provide accountability and oversight. Because this is the only federal agency that receives appropriations in this manner, it becomes highly politicized and totally unaccountable. And it likely violates this thing, the Constitution. Surely there must be consequences for those who rip off consumers, and we actually have a federal agency called the Federal Trade Commission that can do it. So Project 2025 argues to keep Dodd-Frank law, but repeal Section 1061 and abolish the CFPB altogether. Until then, Congress should make sure that any money dispersed from the civil penalty fund goes to victims of the wrongdoing, with the remainder going here to the federal treasury, because the consumer education and financial literacy aspects act as a slush fund for preferred political organizations at the discretion of the director. And regarding those civil penalties, the accused should have the option of having their case heard by an administrative law judge or in an Article 3 court. Obviously, if any of this was to come to pass, most butthurt would be this fake Indian or this spitting fool. And that's it. Have a great day and a more pleasant tomorrow.